Let's talk about body language. Alright, so over the next 2 weeks, we're going to start really getting into skills for attending, observing, and listening. So this week, we're going to really focus on attending and mostly those nonverbal behaviors. And next week, we'll dive a little bit more into listening. So same chapter for both weeks. I might have additional reading for next week. I haven't decided yet. But let's dig in. So when we're talking about these different attending, listening, and observing skills, a lot of what we're talking about are what are called the back channel of helping. These comprise a lot of those nonverbal helping behaviors that keep the relationship going smoothly. And this makes a lot of sense because I'm sure you've heard different statistics, but most of what you actually communicate when you're talking to someone is not about what you say. One of the most standard estimates is only 35% of your words are a part of that impact, but 65% of what you don't say is actually what's communicating most of your message. And of course that includes your facial expressions, your tone of voice, how you move, what you look like, what type of eye contact you make, different gestures, and your posture. So we don't always think about these skills, but these are very important as helpers to think about because they can have a pretty big impact on clients. So attending specifically refers to how we orient ourselves physically towards clients. Are we far away? Are we really up close and kind of in their face? As well as kind of the ways that we are non-verbally responding to clients as they say things. Are we doing this? Or are we just kind of like checked out and not interested? So there are a lot of ways that we can communicate with our body. Again, mostly communicated through nonverbals as well as timely reflections. We'll get into reflections later. And the goal is that in this, we're really trying to think about our nonverbals and our body language and making sure that we're showing that we're engaged. We're trying to show empathy with our body language. We're trying to build rapport with our body language and showing that we really want to listen to what they're telling us. Observing is kind of taking some of these same concepts about understanding nonverbals and body language and applying that to our clients. If we pay attention to our clients, how are their nonverbals and their mannerisms communicating to us? Are the clients engaged with what we're doing? Are they shut down? Or maybe it's, their nonverbals really aren't about us. Maybe they're really going through a tough loss, so they're just like struggling to engage. But we want to start also paying attention to clients' body language. And so again, just looking at those behavioral clues and cues. And those things will really help you in making decisions about what to say or where to go. If a client is not engaged, you're going to have a hard time digging in deeper. So there is a lot of overlap between these concepts, so just bear with me, and I hope that this gives you some interesting things to think about this week. So nonverbals, let's just break down a couple of those areas. I also have posted some other videos for you to watch before this that break down nonverbals, but I wanted to expand upon what you saw in those other videos and really try to apply concepts that are going to be helpful in a helping relationship. So even in this bunch of images that I have here, we have these different people, and what do they look like? We can see without ever speaking to them, they look, first lady looks bored, the second lady is kind of lost in thought, the third one looks almost agitated and bored, like, why, dear Lord, am I here? The third guy is less annoyed but very checked out, and the last guy looks very, very stressed because anytime anyone's hand is buried in their head is buried in their hand, it's not a good thing. So facial expressions. Let's talk about these. There are, if you just take a moment and kind of look through this image, what are the different emotions that you think this person might be feeling? We read facial expressions pretty quickly. We don't even always think about this. But of course, there are a lot of ways that we communicate with our face. So just paying attention to that, being cued into that with clients can be really important. We can see when someone's happy, they tend to have their eyes are squinted up, they're usually smiling, but even, if my eyebrows are raised, I look happy. But when we're scared, we kind of pull back, or our face just, So even practicing in a mirror and looking at your own expressions and the different ways that they are contorted and different emotions can be helpful. But just start to pay attention to different facial expressions. I think it's a useful thing as a helper. Also, how people are moving their head. When people are disengaged, they don't tend to, move their head a lot. But when they're engaged, what is it? It's like, yeah, what did you say? Yeah. Nodding can be a really common way for us to communicate, whether or not we're aware of it. It can also be a way for you to communicate with clients that you're kind of listening and engage with them. So when I'm listening to a client, sometimes I might nod as they're speaking so they know that I am paying attention. Body posture can be a really big one. When we are, really not engaged, we tend to, kind of slouch. You as the helper should not ever be sitting like this. If a client is kind of sitting this way, that might let you know that they're really not engaged or paying attention. And sometimes it can be helpful. I just kind of ask clients, like, I noticed that you seem kind of relaxed or maybe even disengaged right now. Can you tell me about that? But that's something to look for. If we're standing up straight, that tends to be kind of more professional. But there are also ways that kind of keeping that straight as a board posture, I think, can be a little bit unhelpful to clients. You want to look natural. You want to look relaxed. Like, it's good to have posture, but don't look like you're in some type of posture competition. It can also be really good in important times to kind of lean in. When a client is saying something really important to me and I'm talking to them, I find that I kind of lean in. And if I'm in a really serious conversation, I often find that I end up like right by the client, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it freaks them out. But the way that you lean in and out can also say a lot about how engaged you are, and you should be leaning in at times when you feel closer to the client, things feel safe, maybe they're talking about something emotionally important. But just kind of keeping an open, easy posture. Think about your arms. Are you crossing them? What does that communicate? Obviously, that's kind of defensive and closed off. It makes sense that clients might tend to cross their arms because they're feeling kind of vulnerable or unsure. So in this top image, I'm going to assume the helper is the one with her hands open and she's leaning forward, where the client is kind of not making eye contact and arms are kind of crossed because she's nervous. But could you see how maybe the helper's posture of just like openness and engagement might help the other person kind of relax? Proxemics refers to how close you are to clients. Again, that you can lean forward, you can be back, but even how close you are in the room. The second image, it looks like helper is in a situation where the client is getting to a really difficult kind of piece there, and so the helper moved closer and she started to touch him, which we'll talk about in a minute. So she's trying to really show that she's there physically as well as emotionally, and how is he responding to that? Because it's important what the helper does, but also where the client is and how they respond to the helper. He's kind of disengaged. He, may be defensive and not be able to show that emotion. He may not feel safe with her, or it might just kind of be his general defense mechanism. So it's hard to say at times, whether or not that's helpful to kind of move in if someone's not, defensive about it. You should probably, if I were her, I would kind of back off and see that he's not open to that kind of closeness. Eye contact can be another big one. So this is very key because when we are paying attention to someone, generally we're looking at them. However, it can be important to note that if we stare down our clients, we can create anxiety, and you will probably notice some clients that you work with that really struggle to look at you, and they might have social anxiety or just kind of have a hard time in that vulnerable space. But usually if someone's not looking at you in a helping situation, they often feel anxious about something. There are also cultural exceptions to this rule, which we'll discuss culture a little bit later. But in some cultures, looking directly in the eyes is a sign of disrespect, whereas in the United States, that's seen as a really important communication tool. So considering your client's culture can also be important. But general rule of thumb is, for the most time, you want to remain eye contact. It can be okay to kind of look away occasionally to break the tension, but try to keep solid, steady eye contact so your clients know that you are listening. Other nonverbals. There are things called regulators. So regulators are a way that we kind of sort of nonverbally direct what's happening when we're in a helping situation. So what does it do when I do this? That's giving a clear message to the person I'm listening to that I am listening, to kind of keep going. Like, obviously I'm in listening mode here and that's where I'm going to stay, so feel free to keep talking. Also, sometimes nodding can be a type of regulator, like yeah, I'm here, I'm listening, keep talking. Pointing at the watch can sometimes be a sign of like, hey, we're running out of time. I'd be very cautious about this. Make sure that you're not doing it in a way that communicates a lack of interest in the client or trying to aggressively wrap them up. But sometimes you are in work situations where you're going to have to keep track of time. I know as a counselor, I usually have scheduled sessions, and if we're running close to time and a lot's going on, I have ever done this, but usually I'll say in up the very beginning, hey, I have to keep track of time. I have another client that's coming in that they also really need to see me. So when we get close to kind of wrapping up, I might point at my watch. But I honestly haven't done it very often, and it's not my favorite thing, but it is an option. Another one is when you need to kind of pause a client. Again, I would always warn a client, or not warn, but let them know in advance that if you ever need to pause them, that you might do this. I also do it very gently. I usually do it with a, hey, can I just pause you right there? You just said something that's really important, and I want to get back to that. But you want to do it in the least aggressive way possible as a helper. But of course, there are ways that with our hands we communicate things that are going on. You don't use these very much. Yes. So also intimacy and assuring touches. Let's talk about whether or not to touch clients. For the most part, I would say be very cautious about this, but it is very common for doctors and nurses and social workers and counselors and all types of different helping and health professionals to do a little reassuring touch on the arm, when a client is going through something difficult. But again, you really want to gauge the reaction of your client. Sometimes people that have worked with counselors that worked with clients for a long time, and they're discussing something difficult, might grab their hands. I know that I have ever grabbed a hand of a client, but it's usually when I've known them for a long time. So generally, I think it's generally wise to not rush into touching our clients, because that tends to just communicate a lot of intimacy. However, when you're working with children, for the most part, children tend to be they like to get hugs, they like to kind of touch the adults that they feel positively about, and you don't just want to push the child off of you. So I think usually if you're people working with children, they tend to have that a bit more. But as always, just consult with kind of the other people where you work and kind of what is standard practice with assuring touches, because it can be a really powerful way to help people, but also can be, need to be boundaries around that. So let's talk about we talked about regulators and intimacy, persuasion. So another thing about nonverbals is that they can kind of have these persuasive qualities to kind of emphasize points. So when I'm really psychoeducating a client and I think it's a good concept, I tend to open my hands like this. I'm trying to kind of emphasize what I'm saying. But notice I do it with my palms up, because that's a little bit more open. This study that I read a couple years ago showed that there was a study where someone gave a speech in front of a bunch of college students and did the same speech 3 times with 3 different audiences, but they said the exact same thing. But what they changed was their kind of persuasion hand motions. The first time they did this, they pointed at people to make their point. The second time they did this, and the last time they did this. And they had the least approval when they were pointing because it's aggressive. And it was a little better when they were doing this, but this is still kind of aggressive. Palms open is a nice open gesture, so it's a way to kind of illustrate your points without being judgy and aggressive. So that's an interesting thing. Another thing, these are sort of verbal things, but they're kind of more kind of nitty-gritty in the weeds. But tone of voice, so it's not about what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Tone of voice can communicate a lot. This is a huge tool as a helper. So if someone starts to talk to me and they're really sad, I'm immediately going to slow my voice down. Yeah, tell me about that. That sounds really hard. I'm softer speaking. If they're excited, I'm like, good for you. That sounds like something that you were really excited about. It seems like you're really glad that happened. It seems like that was really positive for you. I might speak faster and be more energetic with them. Generally, rule of thumb, it's a good idea to match a client's tone so that you can kind of be there on that level. So if your client is kind of speaking tentatively and softly, you can just speak softly with them, kind of join them. If they're really boisterous and excited, you can kind of join them there. But it can be another nice way to kind of calm someone down or get someone where you want to go. If you have a client who's kind of getting a little bit upset and frustrated and they're kind of raising their voice, saying, yeah, trying to slow it down, soften your voice, and see if you can get them to slow down with you. So just a tool with a lot of different ways to use it. Tone of voice, big deal. I almost said huge, but I'm trying to cut that word out of my vocabulary. Grammatical style is also important. What do I mean by that? So I have to admit that sometimes I've made mistakes of being around colleagues all day in academia and then going in to see a client and not changing the way I'm talking. I shouldn't be talking like I speak to a bunch of doctoral candidates the same way I speak to someone who's come in and has never been to counseling before. Maybe they don't have a college education, and if I use certain words, it's going to alienate my client and make them think that I just need to use that big fancy doctoral language. And I don't. It's important to match your client's language so that they feel comfortable and safe. You know, even I have some clients who cursed in front of me and then they felt sorry, but it was like obvious that cursing is kind of an important way that they know how to express emotion. And so I occasionally might even just say, well, damn, that sounds serious or important. Find some way to let them know, like, however you need to talk in a helping relationship to get your point across, like, it's fine. Obviously, with grammatical style, if someone is using a lot of racial slurs or hate speech, that's not something that I need to copy because that wouldn't be true to me, but just making sure that the level that my language at matches theirs so that the client can feel as comfortable as possible. Minimal encouragers is another one. It's kind of a verbal message, but it's just so basic. They talk about it in the book. It's as someone is talking, you know, as your way of not interrupting them, but showing you're listening, of saying, yeah, wow. So someone's telling me a story about how they were so excited that their daughter got into college, and they're talking about this big transition, and so they have a lot to say just to make sure that they're not, you know, they know that I'm still with them. I'll be like, yeah, cool, interesting. Little things like that, is a really big one. But you want to be careful about how those come across, because you don't want to say them in a way that sounds snarky, as if like, interesting, what you're saying. No, like, you usually want to make sure your face is positive, or if you're in, like, if they're talking about something really sad, you know, their face should match, like, you look serious, but, yeah. Those kinds of little, that's why they're called minimal, because they're minimal encouragers. They encourage someone to keep talking because you are listening. And again, through all of these things, keep paying attention to how clients seem to feel. If they feel open or closed to you, and how are they responding to these different nonverbal tools that you are using. Silence can be awkward for some beginning helpers, but silence can be a very important tool to use. Why? Because sometimes we don't need words. Sometimes in helping situations, it's important that clients sit with their emotions or their thoughts, and they just kind of take that moment. You know, in a helping relationship, we provide space for people to engage with thoughts and emotions that they might not usually engage with. So sometimes they just need to sit with it. This can be really common when someone's talking about something really difficult, some type of grief, some type of loss, if they're describing feelings of pain. Sometimes healthy silences can be good. Silence can be a really good tool to kind of practice anyway, just little pauses before you respond to clients, to make sure that you know what you're going to say. But also, again, if you're being silent because you don't know what to say, that's not good. Silences should be meaningful. They should be meant to give the client time to really sit in what they're saying, or to just be physically present with them, you know, to show that you're caring through your body language and your facial expression. So silence is something that usually makes a lot of new helpers uncomfortable, but using silence effectively can be a really helpful tool in helping relationships. Other related topics, interruptions. So sometimes it is going to be important to interrupt a client if they are getting kind of carried away and you need to refocus them. But again, you're always interrupting them to serve them. So if you want to get back to something important that they said, or you need to kind of slow them down, if it's done in a kind and thoughtful manner with a good rationale, it's fine. But obviously interruptions can also often be seen as aggressive or domineering or disrespectful. So again, just make sure you have a good rationale for why you're interrupting a client. And lastly, cultural issues. Culture can really impact what nonverbal behaviors mean and how they are received. We understand, I think I mentioned before, that in some Asian countries it is disrespectful to give a lot of eye contact, whereas here in the United States it's very common to give a lot of eye contact. This is a quick example of a hand gesture. Here in the United States it says, hey, that's okay. In Japan that means money, Russia that means zero, and Brazil it means a dirty insult. So if you know that your client is coming from a different background or culture, it can be good to, of course, educate yourselves about their nonverbal behaviors and different ways that they tend to relate to one another nonverbally. Another big one is proxemics, like we discussed before, how close or far you are to someone. That there are certain cultures that they get very, very, very close when they're talking, and in others, even being kind of medium close would be too far. They prefer more distance. So just a thing to pay attention to. And if you notice that your client is uncomfortable with something related to nonverbal communication, you can always ask respectfully, as long as it shows that you're wanting to understand so you can better support them. It's okay. So that's all for this week. Just a reminder, for full points on the discussion board, get up your first post by Thursday. Hope you're enjoying the content so far. We'll get back to attending to clients next week. See you then.